My name is Tim Hammerich. I'm a communications consultant and have been the host of the Soil Sense podcast. So if you've heard the podcast, you've probably heard my voice. In the Soil Sense podcast, my job is to be a student and to learn from many of you that are out there tuning into this workshop that we've had on the show. I did want to share a few comments about over the 60 plus episodes, 65,000 downloads I think we're at now for the Soil Sense podcast, what I have gleaned from talking to so many of you, researchers, consultants, farmers, folks in extension, and beyond. And if I were to kind of, sum it up into a punchline, it'd be something that you've heard if you've listened to the podcast before, which is we believe that building healthier soils is not just a prescription, but rather a pursuit. It's a journey, it's a pursuit. And this is probably something that if you're living it every day, it's pretty obvious on the surface. But I actually think if we maybe dig into this statement a little bit further and dissect it a little bit, it does have some really key takeaways for anyone who's showing up for the Dirt Workshop. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here today. Because when I first came to North Dakota and understood what was happening in soil health, I will admit I didn't get it. I kind of thought like, okay, well, here are these practices: reducing tillage, cover crops equals, soil health. It sounded pretty prescriptive to me, right? Like a step-by-step process. Well, I came out as part of a video series and visited Abby Wick at the farm of Joe Brecker in Rutland, North Dakota. And that really opened my eyes to what was possible with soil health. I mean, if you've ever been to Joe's or seen any content about Joe, it's just amazing what is happening on his farm. I mean, he showed me things I'd never heard of before, like biostrip till. He took me to his compost piles that he was getting manure from dairies. We saw people flying on cover crop seed while we were out there. He took us to this field that was at one point separated in two, and you could still see where the fence row was, because on one half it was pasture, and on the other half it was kind of farmed conventionally for many years, and you could still see where the soil had built up from erosion along the fence line. And he's had it in one field for decades. I can't remember how long. I want to say 70 plus years. And it's still, you can still notice a difference in production between the side that was in pasture versus the side that was farmed conventionally. That just wowed me about how long it takes to kind of build back soil health. And so I just learned so much that day at Joe's place, and I was really kind of on fire. In fact, I can remember kind of asking him a really, what I know now is a naive question, which is like, well, why doesn't just everybody do this, right? And I also remember asking him something like, why aren't you famous? Why aren't you the guy on every stage telling everybody how to farm? And of course, in Joe's way, because he's thought about this stuff a whole lot longer than I have, and he's just a really humble guy, he said something that was really profound, I thought. And I forgot I have a clicker here. I can click to the next slide. He says, every situation is unique, but I thoroughly believe that everybody has an opportunity to farm in a more conservation manner from a soil health aspect. Everybody can do it. They just have to figure out what works for them. And so, that was the piece that I was just totally missing, that isn't something where we can just write down everything Joe's ever done in his career and then transpose it to anyone else who wants to build soil health. It's not a prescription that we could just give to them. It has to be a journey. It has to be a pursuit. And Joe's been on this journey a long time. Everybody else is on their own journey that is going to be, as he says, unique to them. And so that was kind of my first big learning. And this was before we ever even had a Soil Sense podcast. But a year later, I thought I kind of understood. I thought I sort of had this stuff down as a result of Joe's wisdom that he was imparting on me. A year later, Abby did call and said, hey, we want to do a podcast, and we're wondering if you would partner with us to do the podcast and produce it for us about soil health. And it was apparent at that point that I still didn't get it. I think Abby was probably rolling her eyes, because I was thinking like, okay, we'll do an episode on tillage, and we'll do an episode on cover crops, and then okay, I'm kind of running out of ideas here. So is this going to be like a 3-episode sort of podcast? And she said, well, why don't you just come out to North Dakota and visit a few more farmers like you did Joe and understand what they're doing on their farms? And she didn't say this, but I'm sure she was probably thinking maybe then you'll start to kind of get it, what's happening out here. And so I did. I mean, we visited half a dozen farms, and it started to be clear to me that everyone was on their own unique journey, that we weren't going to be able to prescribe this as much as I wanted it to be, 10 steps to soil health. That wasn't possible. And really, now that we're here at the Dirt Workshop today, that's why events like this are so very important, because all of us are on a different journey, especially those of you who are either farming or an agronomist or a consultant or a researcher, an extension. You're all somewhere on this kind of soil health journey, and the way that we can help each other is first by acknowledging that it is a pursuit and that it's going to be unique to each and every one of us. It can't be reduced to a book or an online course or even an event. It has to be one step in a journey. Now, the question then becomes, like, how do we help? If everybody's on their own unique journey, certainly there are principles, there are thought processes, there are practices that go in, but how do we help when everybody's kind of on their own journey? And I don't know how to fully answer that question necessarily, but I do know that whenever in human recorded history we've wanted to understand a complex concept, a principle, a virtue, something that just couldn't be written down and memorized, we've used stories. You can see this in hieroglyphics. You can see this in stories that have been traditionally told around the campfire. Knowledge has been passed down from generation to generation through stories. And I obviously have a bias as a communications consultant. I'm all about story. Where is the story? What's the story? But I really think that is the key here. And when we say it's not a prescription, it's a pursuit, another word for pursuit is a story. Essentially, a story is a pursuit. In fact, famously, there's an author named Joseph Campbell who said every story ever written has all had the same elements. It has a character, a central figure that has a problem. They encounter some sort of guide who gives them a plan, and then they take action and they get to wherever they're going, a result or success. And this, on a very small scale, happens on every farm that we've interacted with for the Soil Sense podcast. They have a problem, they figure out what they want to do about it, they try it, and they see if it works, and then they go back and start over. And I think most people aren't thinking about their situation as a story. In fact, when we reach out to farmers, a lot of times to be on the podcast, the first thing they say is, I don't have anything to say. Like, I just do my work. And then we bring them on, and they kind of, you could tell they're thinking this will last 10 minutes and then we'll run out of things to say. And an hour later, we have to call time because it's way more content than we know what to do with. And then at the end of the hour, they kind of say, oh, wow, I guess I had more to say than I thought, but I don't know if any of it's usable. And then we edit it up, and hopefully they're happy with the result, because I know so many people get value out of hearing their story, right? And I think if we consider what's happening in soil health in this way, if we consider it as a story, we can start to draw some conclusions that will help other people on their journey. So we're not comparing our journey to others, and we're not always the hero in the story. I think all of us think of ourselves as a hero in our own story. That's natural, that's human nature, but sometimes you're needed to be the guide. And one thing that I think as I thought about the soil health story one-dimensionally, and I just alluded this to Abby earlier, I always thought, okay, the farmer is the hero, and the consultant, the agronomist, the extension, the researcher is the guide. And that's the way the story works. And what I found from Soil Sense, from interviewing so many of you, is that's not always the case. Sometimes it is. A farmer runs into a problem, and the guide, and in fact, that graphic there, I wanted to change the guide that's like a little wizard to look more like Lee Breeze, but I didn't end up doing that because I couldn't figure out how. But I always thought that that's the way the story works, right? Farmer has a problem, someone helps them, and they break through. But what I realized from doing the podcast is sometimes the extension person has a problem, and the farmer is the guide. Most times, the guide is actually another farmer that helps share their journey and helps them along their soil health journey. Sometimes, the researcher has a problem and says, this is what the data says, but does this make any sense on a practical level? And so, with all of this, I realized we have an unending amount of stories on our hand. For the podcast and just in general. Sometimes it's a farmer that has a problem and an agronomist helps them. Sometimes it's another farmer that helps them. There's just unlimited amounts of stories. But it's interesting when you think about this formula, because even if you think about movies, Star Wars, you got Luke Skywalker is the central character, and you got, Yoda, who is the guide. X-Men, you got Professor X as the guy. I'm sure even in like rom-coms, I'm sure that follows this formula, although I can't speak from firsthand experience. But I really think that if we think about what you're doing in terms of story, not only will it help in keep going with your own journey, but also in helping others with their journey as well. So there may not be anything profound about this, like, okay, yeah, story, hero, guide, got it. But I do think that there are some takeaways here that you can take away as you go forward. Because today in Dirt and tomorrow in Dirt, we're going to talk a lot about practices. We're going to talk a lot about tools, and you're going to get ideas. But the fact is, unless you can kind of incorporate them into your own journey and you can use your journey to help other people, it's not going to get us very far, because all this stuff, as you heard from Joe, is not a prescription, right? Rather, it's a pursuit. So my takeaways from the first 3 seasons here of doing Soil Sense and thinking about all this as a journey, as a story, as a pursuit, there are a few elements that are at the core that I think when people do pursue these 3 elements, their story tends to be one that gets them somewhere. And I'd like to kind of take those one by one. The first thing is what drives people into soil health, which of course is money. Okay, all right, maybe in some cases it's money, but what I was actually going for is curiosity. Every single person we've interviewed for Soil Sense, curiosity, I would say, has to be one of the top 5 descriptors that people would say about them. They're just naturally curious. This is what leads them on this pursuit of building soil health, is a constant curiosity of how can I make my operation better? How can I fix this one problem? How can I optimize my system a little bit more? And it all seems to be driven by curiosity. And this goes for farmers, this goes for agronomists, this goes for researchers, everybody that we've talked to. It all is at the core is curiosity. In fact, I can remember talking to Doug Toussaint, who says, if somebody comes up and they say that'll never work, just say, okay, because obviously they don't have the curiosity that's going to take them on this journey, because it's going to get hard. And if curiosity isn't driving you through those challenges, you're probably going to just be a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're right, it just doesn't work. And I thought that was really telling, that curiosity sort of has to be at the core. I can remember those first visits that we did in person, sitting with Anthony Tillamoni and Dr. Dave Franson in Anthony's shop, and the years of experiments that they have done together. Just constantly curious about what about that, what about this? And all these different experiments that have all been driven by curiosity. I also think about on that same trip, riding around with Tony Wagner in a sprayer. Now you're going to hear from Tony, I think later today maybe. We needed 1 hour of his time. He was busy spraying. He said, well, I guess you could sit in the sprayer, with me and interview me there. And I ended up sitting in there for over 2 hours, just talking about all the stuff he has going on. And it's clear that this curiosity, this desire to sort of tweak things, to tinker, to experiment, is driving so many people on this journey. So if you're out there and you're wondering, like, well, I don't know if any of this applies to me, I would just encourage you to try to foster your own curiosity. What am I naturally curious about? Because you can find the tools, you can find the principles, you can find the practices, but it's that curiosity that I think that is going to drive people to the finish line. And I should clarify, there really isn't a finish line. I think Joe Brecker is an ideal example of that. He is as curious as anyone as I've ever met after doing this for decades and having such an impressive system. So there isn't necessarily a finish line, but there may be a finish line on that one particular problem that you're trying to address. I heard a quote one time also that is really telling on curiosity, which is, you can't be angry and curious at the same time. And I think that goes back to what Doug Toussaint told me, which is, if you're already closed-minded, curiosity is the opposite of closed-mindedness. So if you're already closed-minded, you're obviously not curious. And similarly, you can't be upset, you can't be angry and curious. It's just 2 different ways to sort of deal with things, to react with things. Anyway, I thought that was cool. Another clear example of curiosity that we've seen in Soil Sense is Tyler Zimmerman and Chris Wahlberg. I interviewed those 2 guys. They've been friends since kindergarten, and they said they kind of ran out of things to talk about. They've been friends so long, they just kind of ran out of things to say to each other until they started on this soil health journey. And so their conversations went from a few minutes, hey, how's it going? What's going on? Okay, bye, to really excited about what they're working on, what problem they're trying to fix, different ideas that they could bounce off of each other, which I thought was just another telling sign of what it truly means to be curious and what differentiates a lot of the people that we talk to on the podcast from maybe other people who aren't interested in going on the soil health journey. That curiosity thing was just a major differentiator. Another differentiator, and Chris and Tyler's story definitely speaks to this, is the collaboration aspect. To me, this is the guide in the soil health story. So I know in that kind of cheesy graphic I shared with you, it was like this wizard guide who gives a map. Of course, it doesn't look like that in real life. What it looks like in real life is collaboration. So the curiosity drives people to these incredible collaborations. You can see on there Mark and Matt Olson, who are collaborating on Mark's operation where he's doing strip tillage. You can see Lee, you can see Mark Liebig there. You can see Brad Brumman, who's really a poster child for what collaboration means. And it's been so obvious to me that this is the story of soil health. We want to think about stories as this hero figure on top of a mountain who conquered all by himself, but every single person I've spoken to on the podcast is quick and eager to give kudos to the person who helped them get there. And so if you're here and you're curious and you're trying to improve your operation, one thing I would encourage you to ask is, what are you doing to find those collaborations? Because that's the guide. Maybe you're going to find it in the virtual hallway. Maybe you're going to find it in the chat. Maybe you're going to find it on Twitter. Maybe you're going to find it the next time we can get together in person. But seek out those collaborations, those situations that can be mutually beneficial to try to help with whatever problem you're going through on your journey. And in the same way, a collaboration, both of you could be each other's guides, and as you're going through this pursuit of building soil health. So this has really been an early lesson for me, is that the story we're capturing with the Soil Sense podcast, what we're talking about here at Dirt today, yes, we're going to talk about tools, we're going to talk about principles, we're going to talk about practices, but the story is curiosity and the story is collaboration. And I think a great example of that is sitting right next to me in Abby here. I mean, you just saw what she's doing with those, what do you call them? Webs is what I call them. I don't know what you would actually, networks.
Like that. Networks, a big messy thing.
Yes, those networks. She's not just trying to disseminate information. She's trying to build an ecosystem that fosters collaborations, right? I thought I was collaborating. I was really collaborative before I met Abby, and I realized that I have a long way to go on my journey to be more collaborative, because it's the collaborations that she forms, the alliances that she forms, that make today possible, tomorrow possible, and so much of the outstanding work that's being done in North Dakota on soil health. And I know she won't want all this credit, and we can't give her a round of applause, but just like the sponsors, please, give her a shout out on Twitter, because really that's why we're all here. And what you're going to learn when we bring on the real experts is going to be because of the incredible effort that she put into this. And the last thing I'll mention is something that has come up on this season specifically of Soil Sense. And that's systems thinking. And I didn't know much about systems thinking, but as I've kind of dug into it a little bit more, it really is a fascinating aspect. And I think, one of the challenges to soil health building practices is, because it's not a prescription, because it takes looking at the system holistically and tweaking and knowing that one change on one thing is going to affect 3 other things that you're working on, and having the patience and the curiosity to continue to tweak that system to get it running at the optimal amount. I know we had Woody Van Arkel and Lee Breeze on the first episode of season 3 talking about systems thinking and how they approach that in Lee with his clients, and Woody on his farm in Ontario. And that has really got me thinking about how can we do better to develop a systems thinking mindset. It's hard. It's one of the challenges here. But I think the first 2 principles of curiosity and collaboration have to be on the core of looking at all of these systems holistically and realizing that, even though you may be really focused on reducing tillage, that's one part of the system, and how does that system interact and kind of work together. Now, for a lot of people, curiosity and collaboration is too basic. It's like, okay, come on, that's obvious, right? Give me the really innovative practices, give me the new tools. But I really think until those 2 things, accompanied with this systems thinking approach, are at the core of what's going on, it's going to be a really, really tough to stay on that journey, because I haven't talked to a single one of you on the Soil Sense podcast that hasn't had challenges. And you can't fall back on one absolute tool, one absolute practice. It has to be on your own creativity, which is driven by your ability to be curious and to collaborate with others. And so, I look at the hard work being done, and I look at people who are just constantly driven by the curiosity and collaboration. And I encourage you all, and we're still diving into this, we're still in season 3, to think about, this systems thinking approach and how can you optimize for a better system. All right, now last but not least, I love this quote. It's an old, I guess it's an African proverb, but I think it's really, really telling for what I have experienced, what you have taught me about what's happening in North Dakota and elsewhere when it comes to building soil health practices. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think everybody would agree that building soil health is not a fast process, so going alone is probably not the right approach. So finding ways that you can collaborate with others and go far to actually building soil health over time is what it's going to take. And I'll leave you with this. Your story, your pursuit, your journey is important. It may seem trivial. It may seem like everybody's going through the same thing, but if everybody was going through the same thing, we could make a prescription out of it. So they're not. So I really encourage you to look at your process as a pursuit, one that doesn't necessarily have a finish line, but to share that story with other people.